Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this program today we'll be discussing the social media war against Israel and the Jewish people and how we can fight back. Warm welcome to the programme, and today's special guest is all the way from North London but originally from the North East. His name is Joseph Cohen, who heads up an organisation called the Israel Advocacy Movement. So Joseph, warm welcome to the Middle East Report. I'm very impressed by the YouTube videos that you produced defending Israel, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the programme.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to get to know you and to speak to your viewers.
Fantastic. Can you share with us where it all started? I mean, you told me just before we went on air that you come from the northeast of England, which is quite far from many of the Jewish communities, isn't it? So share with us your Jewish upbringing and how you went from a kind of secular Judaism to be an Orthodox Jew and all that entails.
So I don't have the typical Jewish upbringing, as you quite rightly pointed out. So I come from a socialist, a Marxist family. We lived in the north of England. There were no Jews in the village, and it was a small village life. But the only awareness of our the only Jewish identity we had was one of anti-Semitism. So my father can't tell the difference between a Hasidic Jew, so an ultra-Orthodox Jew with the side curls, and a Reformed Jew. He was completely oblivious to anything to do with Judaism and the Jewish people other than anti-Semitism. So I come from a people, the Jewish people, who've contributed so much to civilization, yet my father and my family's only identity was one of anti-Semitism and negativity and knowing that people wanted to harm us. And so it was a journey that I went on. I wanted to understand what it was to be Jewish, who the Jewish people were, what we'd contributed to the world. And in doing so, I realized it was pretty hard to live a Jewish life in a remote village in the north of England with no synagogues, no kosher food, no Jewish facilities. So eventually I made my way down south to London, to the Jewish community, which is the London Jewish community is the largest in the UK. And I set up my camp here. And since coming down here, because I came from a socialist, a left-wing background, I'd spent my life fighting anti-Semitism. I remember the National Front smashed my father's business's windows because he was Jewish. And so I had this tradition of fighting against anti-Semitism. And when I joined the community in London, I saw there wasn't as much being done as I would like to have seen being done. So I initially founded an organization called the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, which I've stepped away from, and it's in a long time ago, and it was taken to incredible places by the team that runs it today, and they do phenomenal. But when I set up the Campaign for Anti-Semitism, it was during this period that the Gaza war in 2014 kicked off, and during the conflict, anti-Semitism was everywhere. We couldn't move for anti-Semitism on Twitter. The streets were filled with people saying, marching down the street, chanting Hamas, Hamas, Jews to the gas, some of the most obscene anti-Semitism you could imagine. And then the conflict ended and the anti-Semitism went away. It was bizarre, except there was one thing which persisted, and that was, I don't hate Jews, I just hate Israelis. I'm not anti-Semitic, I just hate Zionism. And the one thing that seemed to just remain was this hostility to the Jewish state. So Jews are okay if they're a minority, but if they collectivize and and establish a state, then I'm against that. I'm against Jews being able to defend themselves. And so on the back of that, I decided that, well, there's a very pressing need for a campaign like the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, one of the most critical things we need to do is speak about the elephant in the room, and that is the state of Israel. And Israel needs defending in the UK. So I founded the Israel advocacy movement to do exactly that. We advocate for the state of Israel in the UK to some of the most hostile voices and some of the most friendly voices. So yeah, that's it. That's how I came from the north to the south.
And where did your connection with Israel come from? Because I think this is a key component. Clearly growing up in a kind of Marxist family, Israel wouldn't pretty much be on your radar screen, would it?
No, so Judaism, religion was the opiate of the masses, and nationalism goes against internationalism. So both the religious aspect and the establishment of a state for the collective went against every principle I was raised with. But because we were raised with an identity of anti-Semitism, and because we experienced anti-Semitism, I was very aware of that threat. And so I realized at a very early stage that for Jews to survive, we needed to be able to defend ourselves. And so for the last 2,000 years, prior to the re-establishment of the State of Israel, Jewish survival has depended on the benevolence of the host nation, not someone coming to our assistance with the might and the arms and the military to defend us. And what could happen is there were incredible Christian and Muslim rulers who saved our lives numerous times, but there were also rulers who didn't save our lives, and they acted incredibly evil to us. And because we were dependent on either the ruler showing us mercy or inflicting horrors on us, I realized that actually for Jewish survival, we need a state. And so before religion, before anything, I recognized that Jewish continuity depended on Jews being able to defend themselves and not having to depend on others. And then from there, I was introduced to the philosophy of some of our religious teachers, medieval philosophers like Maimonides, and I became religious. But it was the Zionism, the desire for survival that actually moved me into this space.
It's almost the kind of same revelation as Theodor Herzl, the founding father of the modern state of Israel.
Very much.
And Zionism. Excellent. And can you tell us more about the remit of the Israel advocacy movement? Because we'll be showing some of your videos later, which are superb, that are on YouTube and on social media, where you do challenge the enemies of Israel, and you do challenge the anti-Israel narratives as well as unpacking the kind of anti-Semitism that we're seeing today.
So it's a continuation of what I just described. So the Israel advocacy movement wants to ensure that there are Jewish people for my children's generation, for my grandchildren's generation. It's to ensure Jewish survival. And there's really two components to that for those of us that are living outside of Israel. One is to defend Israel. There are a lot of voices who are incredibly opposed to the existence of a Jewish state. So it's to counter that narrative. We're a small minority. We're one of the smallest people in existence. And there are billions of people, or certainly millions and millions and millions of people that would like to see our state disappear overnight. And so one aspect is defending that, ensuring that doesn't happen, and speaking out against that tsunami of hostility. And the other side is actually defending Jews, because to have a Jewish state, you need a Jewish people. And so again, the Jewish people have faced hatred like no other for 2,000 years. And so it's ensuring today, in my generation, in my age, at least me and my organization are doing all we can to counter the anti-Semitic lies and confront anti-Semitism wherever it rears its head in the United Kingdom.
So Joseph, how important is social media and social media platforms for communicating the truth about Israel and the Jewish people?
Social media is the most important battlefront for the Jewish people outside of Israel. So, and for any Zionist, whether they're Jewish, whether they like the Jewish people, or whether they're just a moderate and they want to see the people in the Middle East, be they Jewish or Arab, to coexist and live in peace. And so social media is the core front for that. I actually learned this from my Muslim friends. There's a concept called dawah, which is proselytizing for Muslims, where they go out onto the streets and they promote Islam. And what I noticed when I was out on the streets talking to people, engaging about Israel, Judaism, was that they'd have a little stall set up, they'd have some flyers on it, they'd be giving away the Quran, and they'd also have a camera there. And so they were looking to convert people to Islam. And traditionally, if someone's proselytizing, you preach to one person. And if you convince them of your arguments, maybe they leave their faith, join your faith. But what they were doing, they were broadcasting that with a video camera. And so the arguments that convinced one person suddenly reached hundreds of thousands of people. And it just grew their ability they scaled their operations from a interpersonal one-on-one to hundreds of thousands of people. And I thought, this is what needs to happen with Zionism. Every Jew I know, every Christian I know that supports Israel is doing it on an individual basis. They were going out, they were talking to colleagues at work, friends over the dinner table, strangers, and they were convincing them that Israel has a right to exist. But that's where that conversation ended. And so I decided that actually we were going to use media to broadcast to as many people as possible. Now, we're a tiny organization. We're basically based out of my house. And we've reached 34 million. We had 34 million people view the videos. We've had Donald Trump, when he was president, sharing them. We've had Netanyahu sharing the videos. This is done with no budget in a bedroom. So it shows you the power of the digital media. It shows you the power of social media. So yeah, it is the most important front for anyone that's wanting to influence. Barack Obama came to power via social media. Donald Trump came to power via social media. Social media is the most important place to be having these conversations and ensuring that there is a strong voice for Israel and the Jewish people.
And I think it's fair to say that you are the leading social media influencer on behalf of the Jewish community in the UK, correct?
It's a very small...
And there are others that do an amazing job, and so we have to talk about them as well. I think some of the regional groups like the Sussex Friends of Israel do a superb job on social media and what have you, particularly during the Gaza conflict of 2014, and others are using social media as a way of raising awareness about Israel and organising events. But what do you say is, what do you need in order to be a kind of social media influence? Because for older generations watching this programme might not necessarily know what a social media influencer is.
So a social media influencer is someone who is on social media that has influence, and it's very, very easy to build influence. So one of the things I speak to people, whenever I speak to anybody who asks, what can I do for Israel? What can I do for the Jewish people? The first thing I tell them is to do something. I'm not eloquent, no university background, haven't been trained in any of this, never picked up a video camera before doing any of this. But what I did was, I didn't just sit on the side and wait for somebody else to do something. I did what you're doing. I actually took it into my own hands and thought, it's better that I do something than nothing. Even if my contribution is tiny, at least I know I've done something. And so with social media, it gives you an instant platform of millions of people if you create the right message and you're able to resonate with people. So the only thing I would tell anybody that wants to do something is, if you're passionate about Israel, then go online, go on Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, wherever, and start trying to engage people and spreading your truth.
Excellent. Sadly, we've written this in recent years, Joseph, that social media platforms have become even more anti-Israel. We've seen an increase in Jew hatred on these platforms that's led to violent attacks against Jewish people. What do you say the extent of the problem regarding Israel and Jew hatred on social media is today?
It's representative of society. Unfortunately, there is a lot of anti-Semitism and huge anti-Zionism in the West, in the UK, in America, in Europe. And people have the advantage of being able to be anonymous and also to reach large audiences online. And so those hostile voices are amplified, and it doesn't help that social media algorithms respond very positively to hatred. So if you have someone who makes a video on, and actually I can give some real world examples from me.
Please do, yeah.
I've made videos which are incredibly positive about making peace between Jews and Muslims, making peace between Israelis and Palestinians, and promoting the good relationships between Jews and Christians. These videos tank. Nobody watches them. Why? Because the algorithms pick up the the negative stories. So if I put up a video about how I was attacked by someone, and I've been attacked numerous times defending Israel, that video will go viral. If I put up a video with a negative spin again, which we don't do, but if I were to put up a negative speaking ill of another community, that will be seen as sensationalism and picked up. And so the algorithms will see what people are engaging with. So even if you respond negatively to the content, say someone spreads something hateful online, and you leave a message, this is disgraceful, how can you say something like that? The algorithm will say, there's engagement on this, let's amplify it and boost it to more people so we can get more engagement, so we have more people on the platform, so we can sell more content to advertisers. There's not a day goes by when I don't receive a death threat online. A literal death threat, and it's coming from different communities, and will come on all the platforms. We're on 4 platforms. We're not on TikTok because I'm a little bit too old, but we're on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and we will receive death threats on all of those. And I've had people ring up and track down my wife, ring her up and threaten her because she's associated, and this is all coming from online.
Ooh. Would you explain to our viewers as well, I mean, we hear very much about algorithms, but can you explain to our viewers what algorithms actually are and how they change the kind of viewing figures of a particular video that might be posted to YouTube? So
the easiest way to think of it is if on social media you have a feed of all the people you're watching. It could be following, it could be your friends, it could be political news stations, it could be the BBC, it could be anything. These are the people that you're following. And so in a basic world, as someone posted, that post would appear chronologically. And so you just have a list going down. So today, Dave posted this. Yesterday, Michael posted that. Janine posted something the day before, and you could just go down and see things in order. But what algorithms do is they look at this and say, okay, which of these messages does John really want to watch? And so they will then try and calculate what you want to see, and that will be the feed, that will be the information that you consume. And so many people are completely oblivious to the fact that almost all of the content they consume online is curated. So there is huge, huge power in the hands of big tech, because they essentially shape the way that we think. If you're only seeing news sources, if you're only seeing news from source A and never seen it from source B, you're completely oblivious to what source B is saying. And so big tech has a huge influence on what we think in the West, and they want to keep people on their platforms as long as possible. So they're looking for the content that people will watch and engage with, which can be quite negative content.
I really appreciate you explaining that. Can you also explain the fact, for example, if we take last May, for example, when Israel was under attack by over 4,000 Hamas rockets and missiles, paralysing 2/3 of the country, couldn't go to work, couldn't go to school, had to stay in almost bomb shelters under a week. Now, I've got very close Israeli friends who live in Herzliya. They had to spend virtually all that time under the staircases in their apartment block, primarily because of these rockets and missiles that were going off. And of course, that led to an IDF response that only targeted the Hamas terrorists. And yet, what we saw then, that became the #1 big media story that the media followed, the likes of BBC, CNN, ITV, Sky, and then we saw, and there's repeated patterns for this, an explosion of hatred towards Israel and anti-Semitism on social media. Can you explain how that works?
Certainly. So I think actually if we go back to the actual conflict itself is really important to understand, because then it helps us to contextualize the social media response. So what was that conflict all about? Well, there's a small neighborhood in Jerusalem called Sheikh Jarrah. Sheikh Jarrah used to be, and still is, a neighborhood called Shimon HaSadiq and Nachalat Shimon, which were 2 Jewish neighborhoods that stood for a long, long time. The Jews purchased the land there, and it's named after Shimon HaSadiq, Shimon the Righteous, who was one of the last of the high priests within the Jewish tradition, a very, very, very important man. And he's buried there, so Jews would go on pilgrimage there for centuries. In I don't want to get the dates wrong, but before the 48 war, the Jews were ethnically cleansed from those neighborhoods. And when Jordan conquered that region, they established an Arab neighborhood on what was a Jewish neighborhood. And so there's been a legal battle for many, many years in the courts over who was the rightful owners of these houses, the Jews who used to live there or the Arabs that Jordan moved into the houses. And the courts found in favor, and the neighborhood, the Arab neighbors, the neighborhood actually agreed that this was Jewish land. And so there were all kinds of offers made for these families to stay there. And some of them have been evicted because the courts ruled that they had no right. They turned down many of the options. And what we saw was just this explosion of social media attention on what was effectively 7 or 8 families in one tiny neighborhood in Jerusalem. And to put that into context, at that same time, Boko Haram were massacring entire villages and nobody bats an eyelid. And yet a Jew tries to reacquire legal ownership of their home, and it's an international story. That then led to riots on the Temple Mount, which then Hamas threatened that if Israeli police don't stop interfering with the riots on the Temple Mount, the rioters were actually throwing objects, throwing Molotov cocktails and trying to hit the Jewish worshippers down below at the Western Wall. Hamas said, if you don't stop trying to control this by 6 p.m., then we are going to start firing rockets on Israel. And this is the absurdity of it. Hamas claimed that they love Jerusalem, Al-Quds in Arabic, yet they were firing rockets upon Jerusalem. So they set their deadline. Israel obviously didn't pull back and allow its citizens to be attacked by rioters. They tried to contain the riots. Hamas then launched a wave of rockets, and that was it. The conflict between Israel and Hamas was initiated, and it was initiated by Hamas. And it all came down to effectively 7 or 8 families living in this small neighborhood called Sheikh Jarrah that used to be Jewish. As a consequence, social media exploded. And there were millions and millions and millions of posts made on all of the platforms attacking Israel, demonizing Israel. And so you had entire villages being massacred in Africa. No one bats an eyelid. Israel has a legal dispute over some property, and it's an international story with just a tsunami of hatred.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at one of Joseph's videos. This one's entitled Jews Attacked at Israel Rally.
On Sunday, as British Jews celebrated the ceasefire in Israel, violent extremists attacked us on the streets. As 2,000 of us rallied for Israel and for peace, including the ambassador, politicians and community leaders, an angry crowd of Islamists and pro-Palestinian activists began hurling abuse at us. A few Jewish boys who were trying to join the rally took a wrong turn and mistakenly walked into the Islamist protest. As I arrived, it looked like 2 popular YouTubers, Mohammed Hijab and Ali Dawah, were riling up the mob. It was terrifying. The boys had to be rescued by the police as bottles and eggs rained down on them. Mohammed Hijab then threatened a police officer that he'd kill the boy's dog if he saw it again.
However, when those Zionists came in with their dogs, that was an act of provocation. So what we're saying now, and I'm making it very clear so everyone understands, if those dogs come close to us again, we will see it as an act of aggression, and we will kill those dogs, we'll put them down.
Hijab and Dawah then led the crowd to Speaker's Corner, and as the mob marched through London streets, screaming, "We'll find some Jews, we want their blood," the police did nothing. Let that sink in. They're calling for our literal blood, and the police are just strolling alongside them.
We'll find some Jews there! We want the Zionists, we want the blood!
This is the Nike anti-Jewish edition.
A couple of hours later, we were violently assaulted leaving a kosher restaurant in an anti-Semitic attack. I hate to say this, but I'm not sure there's a future for Jews in this country. We're being attacked on the streets by extremists, and the police do nothing.
The difference between us and them is that for them, they think life begins. For us, we believe that death begins. We believe that life begins at death. We don't care about death. We love death. And if you think that our people in Palestine or across the Arab and Muslim world will let go of the struggle and our
After a pro-Palestinian convoy drove through a Jewish neighbourhood threatening to rape Jewish women and children, this odious pair drove to that same neighbourhood, Golders Green, broadcasting inflammatory messages on the side of a lorry. In summary, the UK doesn't feel like a safe place for Jews anymore. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us make more videos like this, you can support us on Patreon, or you can purchase the merch, or simply share this video and follow us on all of our social media. It all helps.
And that should be a wake-up call to all of us to know the situation facing the Jewish community in this country, and we can't tolerate that. Brilliant video, how you put that all together, but at the same time, absolutely terrifying and frightening content to know that there are people in this country that hold such deeply anti-Israel and even anti-Semitic views.
Yeah, I mean, it's anti-Semitic. There's no question about it. When you have people marching down the street chanting that they want the blood of Zionists, this is anti-Semitism. And the most harrowing part of that video wasn't the content. It wasn't the anti-Semites. It was the fact that the police were just marching along the side. It was the fact that he stood there staring the policeman, or looking down on the policeman, and telling the policeman that he's going to kill the young boy's dog if they come back with that dog. This is the part that scares me. And it comes back to what we were saying earlier, that Jews in the UK, we are dependent on the state to keep us safe. Absolutely. And here you have the state who do keep the Jews safe in the UK. They do a very good job. Yet you've got people marching down the street, screaming for my blood, screaming for our blood, screaming for my daughter's blood. And they're just marching alongside. It was a staggering thing to observe.
And this all took place outside the Israeli embassy?
So yeah, all with the exception of one. Yeah, it all took place outside the Israeli embassy. We organised a rally to support Israel, to support and celebrate the fact that peace had been made. Both parties had agreed to de-escalate, and so we were celebrating. And a hostile anti-Israel protest was quickly called by the people you saw in the video, and they were incredibly hostile. They attacked the young Jewish boys with their dog. They marched down the street screaming for Jewish blood, and then later that day we went off to get some food from a kosher establishment. As we left there, we walked a little bit, and we were attacked simply because we were Jewish by a group of thugs.
And what response did you have on social media to that video? Because we didn't see that video on our kind of mainstream media. We didn't really have those kind of reports, even from our broadsheets being broadcast, actually written into print. But that is terrifying.
So we were really fortunate, and there was two incidents that captured the public's attention. First was the video we created that we just watched, and that was ignored by the mainstream media. But it did reach at least 750,000 people online. That's what we were able to observe. So it was the British public were appalled at what they saw, even if it wasn't broadly reported. And then the other side of it, we touched on it, was the convoy that came down from Bradford and drove through the streets threatening to attack the Jewish community. That reached the ears of the Prime Minister, and that did make the mainstream media. So we're fortunate that some of these stories do break through, but these kind of things are happening every day and nobody knows. And anti-Semitism seems to be the only form of racism which is ignored and swept under the carpet. I'll give you an example. Last week, a few days ago, there was a hostage situation in Texas in a synagogue where a British man got on a plane, flew to America. He believed that Jews controlled the world, controlled America, and he thought that if he kidnapped Jews, that took Jews hostage in a synagogue, that they would be able to somehow pick up the phone to the president, say, "Hey, Mr. President, I'm a Jew, I control you, can you release a terrorist who was in jail?" And so he believed that by kidnapping Jews were so powerful that they'd be able to free this terrorist that was incarcerated for, I think, 82 or 86 years. Yeah. And the issue with that is how it was then reported. So the FBI came out and said, even though this terrorist was talking about murdering Zionists, he'd went into a synagogue, he'd kidnapped the rabbi and some of the congregants and kept them hostage, the FBI came out and said, this wasn't related to anti-Semitism, it wasn't to do with the Jewish community. Yet, if someone so much as blinks the wrong way, it can be deemed Islamophobic, it can be perceived as anti-black racism. Yet when it comes to the Jewish community, you can literally walk into a synagogue, kidnap the rabbi, hold them hostage because you believe that they've got the power. They believe this anti-Semitic trope that Jews have so much influence that they can then just pick up the phone to the president and get people released. You can go to all of those lengths, and the media and many in the establishment will do everything they can to say it's anything but anti-Semitism. It's absolutely, we're living in a crazy time where we are so concerned, rightly so concerned with racism, except when it comes to racism against the Jewish people. And then we're happy to look away and just pretend it's anything but that.
With dangerous spiritual consequences, right? Because with Jew hatred, it starts with the Jewish people but never finishes with the Jewish people. And learning from an interview in the great Robert Ristrich, one of the world's leading experts in anti-Semitism before he died, he spoke about how that this is like a cancer that destroys civilizations. And if you don't stand up against it, then your whole society becomes toxic. And this is the world's oldest hatred. And you can also judge a society by the way that it treats its Jews. And if the Jewish people are in danger, that means the rest of the society in danger. Is that why it's so imperative that so many people watching social media truth come to understanding of the truth, but don't actually indulge in Jew hatred because it actually consumes the individual?
I'd say it's two things. It's that and it's something else. We shouldn't stand by as an injustice is carried out. So if you observe any minority, Hindu, Christian, Coptic Christian, it doesn't matter whom is being subject to an injustice, if you stand by and do nothing, then shame on you. So the first thing, if we see an injustice, we should all stand together and oppose that vocally, put an end to that discrimination. The other side is absolutely right, and that is the Jews are often the canary in the coal mine. And what begins with the Jewish community does not end with the Jewish community. It's just we are one of the most visibly different minorities. And so the Holocaust, which was the worst horror inflicted on the Jewish community certainly in modern history, and one of the worst in all history, if not the worst in all history, it wasn't limited to Jews. It started with Jews and then quickly moved on to Roma and many other people who the Nazis took objection to. So what starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. So that's one reason to stand against anti-Semitism, and the other is we should all stand against injustice.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at this shocking CBN report that looks into the influence of social media on anti-Semitism, particularly in the United States.
Phone video of attacks against Jews in cities across the U.S. shared on social media show how Palestinian supporters are bringing the war against Israel and against Jews to America's streets. Jews around the world know that when Israel is attacked and fights back, they become even bigger targets for violence. A Jewish man was savagely beaten in New York's Diamond District, another in Times Square. Police are looking for these suspects. In Los Angeles, a man is being held on suspicion of assault with a deadly weapon after an anti-Semitic attack on Jewish diners. 10 cars full of Palestinian supporters rolled up and tried to attack them as they ate outside in Beverly Hills. Police are investigating the incident as a hate crime. In Canada, a Jew attacked in broad daylight. And in Florida, this pro-Palestinian caravan says Hitler was right. Rabbi Abraham Cooper of the Simon Wiesenthal Center.
The language of the caravans that are going through Jewish areas with anti-Semitic slogans being spat, and we're going to rape your wives and children and things like that. There's a sense that it's open season and fair game against Jews.
The Anti-Defamation League has documented anti-Semitism on multiple social media platforms, including 17,000 tweets which used variations of the phrase Hitler was right, and 193 anti-Semitic incidents in the week after the fighting in the Middle East began. Rabbi Cooper says statements by Palestinian supporters in the Democrat Party embolden anti-Semites.
When the squad members, openly lie about Israel, use anti-Semitic tropes, knowing they can say whatever they want as elected members of Congress, and that the leadership of Congress won't take them down on that kind of rhetoric, the signals abound that you can get away with it.
And Rabbi Cooper says it's imperative that Christians stand by Jews and speak out strongly against the attacks, and that the White House must do more to stop it. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Excellent report there put together by CBN. I mean, that was in the States, clearly, but, when we look at America, America was probably the last nation to be touched by anti-Semitism until probably about 2016, and then we saw attacks on Jewish cemeteries, and then we've seen attacks on Jewish synagogues as well. And the climate in America is changing because it's not confronting Jew hatred, and it seems to be getting worse around the world. But how do you counter the lies, the misinformation, and the Jew hatred that we see on social media? And obviously this is a full-time job here almost.
So I think the first thing you do is you have to focus on where it's coming from. And that video is actually very telling. Most people watching that would be completely oblivious. So historically, anti-Semitism in America came from the far right. You have numerous neo-Nazis who've walked into synagogues and gunned down Jews while they're worshipping. This video highlighted the both during and the aftermath of the recent conflict between Hamas and Israel. And there were a lot of Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, far-left protesters taking opposition and attacking Jews on the streets, as we saw in that video. But there was something else in that video that most people would be completely oblivious to. And that was the truck. One of the trucks that drove through in the footage had loads of anti-Semitic statements on it. It was driven by a neo-Nazi organization called the Goyim Defense League. And what we're seeing is neo-Nazis, far-left anti-Semites, Islamist anti-Semites, all singing from the same sheet. They're all saying that they're believing the same tropes. They're involving each other in the same anti-Semitic spaces. And so if you go to a far right website, you will find Islamist and far left people. We have people who've been radicalized from the far left and turned into full-blown neo-Nazis. And so the first thing to do when combating is understand what they're saying and where it's coming from. And then it's very, very easy to take apart the lies, because whenever you scratch the surface, the truth is very, very easy to find, and then it's just a case of telling that. So if it's a Jew building a house in a neighborhood people think they shouldn't be, look at, okay, so why is there a house being built there? Who is the actual legal owner of that land? And if it turns out that the narrative that is being amplified is incorrect, then correct it. Post it on social media, tell people the truth. And so, yeah, it's understanding where the threat comes from, what they're saying, and then rebuttaling it.
Excellent. So we've got another one of Joseph's videos to show you now, which is absolutely brilliant.
You will always hear in the media, Gaza is a concentration camp, Gaza is an open-air prison, and you see scenes that look like a war zone. This is the real Gaza. And I wanted to show the world what the real Gaza was, because it's not what they see in their media. It's tower blocks like this, it's apartment blocks like this, it's luxurious apartment blocks. That is not the Gaza that people imagine. People think that people in Gaza are starving, yet here we have nice food markets, we have a jewelry market, it's not what people imagine. And now, yes, like any area, there are impoverished parts, but there were also very, there were also more affluent neighborhoods. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Gaza is like Qatar or it's like Monaco. It isn't. But it also isn't a concentration camp. You don't have water parks, you don't have luxury villas, you don't have shopping malls like the one you're looking at in concentration camps, in open-air prisons. And so the living conditions of the people in Gaza could certainly be improved, and the biggest obstacle to that improvement is the Hamas government, who take billions in aid, and instead of investing it in infrastructure like what we're looking at, They spend millions and millions and millions building terror tunnels, building weapons to attack Israel, instead of investing in their people. But the purpose of this video is to show the world that what they think Gaza is not the truth. And that is the Gaza you don't see.
No, you never see that on our mainstream media. And looking at it, I actually thought it actually could be Dubai when I first saw that video that you sent me yesterday, Joseph. Now, I've got close Israeli friends, and this was, I went to Israel 1 month after the 2014 Gaza war. And my Israeli friends were saying, why do Hamas, why do the people of Gaza accumulate so many rockets and missiles and want to destroy us when they have some of the best beaches on the Mediterranean? They could turn their weapons into restaurants and to tourism, and it would thrive. But they're more interested in destroying Israel as a Jewish state than they are looking after the interests of their own people. But we never hear that narrative, do we?
Completely. There's one simple thing I like to go back to. In 1948, imagine, just picture this, in 1948 when Israel declared independence, if at the same time the Palestinian leadership said, actually, we'll declare independence, and the Palestinians declared independence, and they had a state which would be in Gaza and Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, as it's more commonly known in the West, and they established a state, they would have had 73 years of nation building. There wouldn't be one refugee, there wouldn't be one life lost, there wouldn't be one war. Instead, we've had numerous wars. Instead, you'd have two nations side by side working together in economic cooperation, hopefully. And instead, they could have modeled it on the Jewish state. In that same 73 years, the Palestinians have been able to build up very little because they've been let down by their leadership time and time again. At the same time, Israel has turned itself into one of the most innovative nations in the world. There's an incredible quality of life. It's saved millions of Jews from persecution. They've built and contributed, and they're contributing to the arts, the science, the technology, to medicine. Today, it's almost immeasurable what the Israeli nation is contributing. The Palestinians could have been doing exactly the same thing. Instead, they have repeatedly, or their leadership has repeatedly chosen a path of war. And so instead of building up Gaza for the people, Hamas invests their money in rockets, in weapons, in terror tunnels, with the ambition of destroying Israel. And the reason they've turned down peace at every opportunity is because their leadership refuses to acknowledge the existence of a Jewish state on their doorstep.
Well, I mean, we've shown a couple of videos already. Your first one about the streets of London near the Israeli embassy and the brutal anti-Semitic rhetoric and attacks against your people, the Jewish people. But if we take a step back, and considering how much hatred there is towards Israel on social media and on the social media platforms, anti-Semitism, do you think that the social media giants such as Facebook and Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and even TikTok are doing enough to rid their platforms of this hatred? Or do you think it's, as you said earlier in the program, more to do with the algorithms? The more hatred there is on their platforms, the more interest they generate, and therefore the more profits are coming into these companies?
So I would say it's twofold. So the big social media giants have got quite good at combating a very specific form of hatred. And that's the hatred of the far right, of white supremacist neo-Nazis. They're very good at clamping down on that, and they have done a great job, and rightfully so, removing this hateful content from their platform. They are completely blind to different forms of hatred and more nuanced forms of hatred. And so you can literally have the leader of Iran calling for the genocide and the extinction of the Jewish state and the Jewish people. His posts are allowed to stand. He's allowed to stand. But if it comes from a different community, I mean, to put that into context, Twitter had no problem removing the sitting president of America.
It was democratically elected.
It was democratically elected, but they won't remove the sitting ruler of the Iranian people. And so it just shows how there is this blind spot which big tech, and it's more that it's many in the West in general, they have a complete blind spot to prejudice that's coming from different areas. So yes, they're good at clamping down on some forms of anti-Semitism, but abysmal at clamping down on others.
And Joseph, I want to talk to you about a report that came out in October of 2021, and the Times of Israel wrote about this, and they investigated anti-Semitism on social media, produced by the UK-based organisation Hope Not Hate, and these are some of their findings. They said that anti-Semitism is being repackaged and disseminated to a younger generation of social media users through platforms like Instagram and TikTok. They talk about how, in their report that's entitled Anti-Semitism in the Digital Age, they talk about how Instagram, which is owned by Facebook, and most of their users, 70% of their global users are aged between 13 and 34. And they were saying there are millions of results for hashtags relating to anti-Semitism. And I'll just have the same report also talks about how that TikTok, 69% of the users are aged between 16 and 24. And there are collection of three hashtags linked to anti-Semitism have been visited more than 25 million times in 6 months. This is beyond the pale, isn't it?
It's completely beyond the pale. And not only are the social media giants bad at containing it, but the racists are very quick to adapt. So let's say you have a word, the Jews, or two words, the Jews. So social media will listen out for the Jews. So what do the racists say? They change the word. So it's not the Jews, they'll say the Swedes, or they'll say the Little Hats, or the Blues, and they literally just circumvent the bans and still spread their messages of hatred by just one simple thing, changing the language. And so the social media giants have a difficult challenge, but they are completely able to enforce different. So they're able to shut down certain forms of prejudice, but they just seem like they're not either investing the resources or they're incapable of policing anti-Semitism online, because it just continues to grow and morph, and it doesn't matter which platform, whether it's YouTube, TikTok. TikTok's particularly bad at containing it, which is the most disturbing part, because that's the most popular platform amongst the youth, and it has the most engagement. People that use TikTok use it far more than they'll use YouTube. They use it more than they use Instagram or Facebook, and it's the least effective at containing or controlling the hatred as just rampages through the platform.
Despite the fact it's actually controlled by the Chinese government and operates as a kind of spy network. So if you're on TikTok, you guarantee that all your contacts will be known. Everything on your phone will be linked to the Chinese government. Do
you want to know the real irony with this one? So all these people are calling, let's boycott Israel because in Israel, a Jew's building a house in the wrong neighborhood. Yeah? China has got 1 million Muslims in concentration, the Uyghur people in concentration camps. Yet they're on TikTok saying, let's boycott the only liberal democracy in the UK, in the Middle East. If you don't see the hypocrisy there, where you want to boycott a democracy in the Middle East while using the technology from a country which is literally has 1 million Muslims in concentration camps, then there's no greater example of hypocrisy that I can think of in the modern world.
No, absolutely. And we're down to 6 minutes of the programme, Joseph, so I want to get two very important points across before we finish the programme. My first one is, particularly when it comes to TikTok and probably Instagram, with a kind of younger audience and users of those social media platforms, and being exposed to anti-Semitism at such a young age, this is almost the equivalent of the Hitler Youth, isn't it? In terms of doctrination of Jew hatred. Yeah,
I mean, I wouldn't make the comparison, because most people on Twitter, on TikTok and Instagram aren't subscribing to an anti-Semitic ideology. But what I would say, it's creating a fertile ground from which those ideologies will emerge. You have a younger generation which is so detached from the Holocaust that It means that, like, every statistic I've read about the Holocaust, unfortunately I can't remember them off the top of my head, but it's something crazy, like 1 in 4 Americans, young Americans, knows about the various details about the Holocaust. There's a huge ignorance amongst the youth to this, and when you mix that with this dangerous and toxic levels of anti-Semitism on these platforms, then yes, it does create a very fertile ground from which ideologies like Nazism, like Islamism, can just, in terms of anti-Semitic Islamism, can just spread like wildfire.
Absolutely, and of course the pandemic, COVID-19, has also caused a problem, leading to a huge number of conspiracy theories, like the Elders of Zion, that the Jewish people controlled the world. They are the ones causing COVID-19, which has then led to a kind of pandemic in terms of hatred towards the Jewish people. And this is another danger to counter.
So it's basically whatever ill these people see in the world, they want to blame the Jews for it. So, and it's kind of how anti-Semitism works. If you trace anti-Semitism in all of its forms, so if you're in a communist nation, well, the Jews invented capitalism. If you're in a capitalist nation, well, the Jews are the Bolsheviks, they're the communists. In the modern age, human rights is the greatest concern. So what are Jews? Jews are the greatest violators of human rights in the world, which is just absurd because Israel is literally a liberal democracy. And this is just the latest. So the pandemic, people are confused. They're trying to make sense of this new reality. Governments are imposing measures which they agree with or disagree with, but they're trying to make sense. And what do? They blame the Jews. They see the hand of the Jew behind it. So it's literally, the Jews will be scapegoated and blamed for whatever ill these people see in the world.
I mean, you've done a fantastic job on this program today, Joseph. So our viewers that are very much on social media and use social media, how can they watch your videos? How can they follow you? And how can they fight back against this anti-Israel sentiment and anti-Semitism on social media?
So it's very easy. If you head over to the Israel Advocacy Movement on either YouTube, Instagram, Facebook or Twitter, we're there. Reach out, send us a message. We'd love to hear from you.
And of course, your excellent videos are on YouTube as well that explain a lot of these issues. What do you think the challenge is going ahead in terms of educating young people about the truth of Israel, the truth about the Jewish people, and also the dangers of anti-Semitism?
So the only response, the only thing we can do is, for those of you that are watching, if you care about Israel or you care about your Jewish neighbors, brothers, sisters, friends, then you need to speak up. It's not on someone else. You can't wait for the media or for the government or anyone else to step in. It's on you, the person that's watching this, to actually do something. Take to social media, make a post, correct a lie, but it's on you to actually do something. You can't wait for anybody else because they might not come.
No, absolutely. So we're down to the last 2 minutes of the programme, and as of the recording of this programme today, there's a headline in the Times: Auschwitz survivor, TikTok can't teach children about the Holocaust within 30 seconds. So in a time when we see so much Holocaust and education, whether it's online media, documentaries, books, it seems that this younger generation have forgotten those lessons already and don't actually know of the horrors of the Holocaust. How can we use, for example, in your role, social media to talk about the Holocaust, particularly after this programme would be aired a day after International Holocaust Remembrance Day? I
think you have to understand that the arguments that the anti-Semites are making, Holocaust deniers, or people are just ignoring it in its entirety, they're doing it on these same platforms. They're doing it on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. So if they're doing it there, we have to do it there. And we have to find better ways of communicating this information to people that are maybe ignorant to it.
Absolutely. And also share with us the challenge you face of recording some of these videos, of actually finding the video footage, putting it together, doing the voiceover and doing the excellent commentary and analysis that you do.
So the research is the fantastic part. That's the easy part. You sit at a desk, you type in some keywords, you trail social media, and you find the anti-Semites, you shine a spotlight on them. The difficult videos are the ones that are in person, where you actually go onto the streets and you risk being attacked. But it's still important that people go out there and do things publicly, because we should be not shamed into hiding by anti-Semites.
Joseph, thank you so much for being my guest on today's Middle East Report. You've done a great job. Thank you. It's been a pleasure interviewing you. And I just want to thank you for watching this programme at home. If you're on social media, this is an opportunity to stand up for Israel and the Jewish people. So I want to thank you for watching today's Middle East Report.